being new is that it's good to just try new things. So I'm not an expert in stewardship. I was a little like, you want me to do a stewardship talk? But I, like you, just want to try things that work, because whatever was working in my congregation, it wasn't all working. So I just thought, well, you know, why not try new things and see what works? So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. And one of the things that I am really passionate about as a minister is helping people heal from their wounds and their baggage around money. It's a huge pastoral issue. People often get divorced over money issues, not necessarily not having enough money, just having disagreements about money. Or it can often be a leading cause of suicide, death by suicide. And I feel like as a minister, more importantly than keeping the lights on in the building, is helping people heal from their wounds around money. So shifting the conversation away from, we need you to pledge so that we can keep paying our bills, toward how do we shift our spiritual outlook to understand generosity as a spiritual practice and not a burden. So we're not there yet. I've only been here a year, but we're working on it. So I'm gonna just show you, if I can get my share screen to work here. I'm gonna show you my slides. And the first slide is just sort of a little bit of kind of our plan for the evening. So can you see that? Sharon, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So the first few minutes, I'm going to talk about our kind of collective challenges in this new setting, and then what we did last season for our stewardship plan. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the services that we did, and this thing called the reverse offering, which you read about in the description of this talk. And then the one extra thing that we're doing this year, which is a raffle. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to that. So that's what I'm going to cover this evening. So to start, when I got here, the congregation search committee was very clear that one of their big challenges was finances. So it wasn't a surprise coming in, but it was still living into the reality of that challenge has been, you know, kind of hard. This is a 700-member congregation with a budget expense line of about $650,000, which is really small comparatively for our size. So we are really understaffed. That's one of the things that's a big challenge. We're understaffed for our size. And we're also, I'm pulling up my notes here. One thing that is a good thing is that we are paying fair compensation according to the UUA fair compensation guidelines to our staff. But we don't have nearly enough staff to serve a congregation of this size. So the staff are really overworked and kind of burned out. This congregation has a history, really long history, of not talking about money. Very recently, like within the last decade, they started passing a basket for an offering. People remember that being like a huge deal that they passed a basket for an offering. So, you know, just kind of overcoming a culture of we don't talk about money. People kind of joke that the old stewardship ask was, if you feel like it, maybe possibly give, maybe. That's not a great way to inspire people to give. So, and I'm, like I said earlier, one of my goals in ministry is to help people heal around money, and doing that, saying like, why can't, you know, maybe if you feel like it, that just reinforces this message that talking about money is dirty or shameful or somehow not good for us. So one of my goals was to just talk about it. The other history and challenge was that they had one stewardship sermon around stewardship season, and no one wanted to come to that service because who wants to come to that service? So I wanted to kind of overcome that as well. So those are the challenges I'm facing. A really small budget, a history of not talking about money, really understaffed, and this like service that no one likes. So when we decided to talk about money, we decided to talk about it primarily from the angle of the fact that we didn't have enough staff. Staff is almost always, the largest chunk of any budget. And we recognize that cutting $100 here off the flower budget and $200 here off something else was not going to fund additional staff. We really needed people to give a lot more. And so our stewardship team, which is a lay team, came up with the theme for our stewardship campaign: Justice Starts Here. We're a congregation that has a real identity around justice out there in the world. And the stewardship team was saying, it's not just the way we're treating our staff. So that became kind of the thrust of our entire campaign, that if we pride ourselves on justice work, then we need to be just to the people who are serving this congregation. And so that, I thought that was really cool coming from the laity, who wasn't coming from the minister or the staff, and to hear them talk about why that was important. That yes, we were paying fair compensation guidelines, but if we're burning them out and they're working 80 hours a week because we don't have enough staff, that's not really fair. This, let me see if I can find my screen here and share it with you. I'm going to show you the screen of one of our pages from our stewardship materials. And can you see that? I'm relying on Sharon to tell me if you can't see anything. Good night. I love you.
Thanks, Mom. We can see that.
Yeah. So this was one of the pages from our, several page document around stewardship, and one of the members of our team called some congregations which were around our size, actually smaller than us, and put together this grid, which has information about, they call it an FTE comparison, or a full-time equivalency comparison, which shows how many full-time staff these other congregations have compared to us. And in some areas like ministry or DRE, or even congregational life, we're doing fine. But in terms of music, RE assistants, building staff, things like that, we're way behind, and the total adds up to about 2 or more full-time staff less than everyone else. So that was an interesting learning for our congregation, to sort of really see the reality of where we are compared to other congregations. And then they also did this, we also did this fellowship staff by program area, which is the bottom half. And this was the very, very beginning of what is sometimes called narrative budgeting. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But essentially what I asked all of the staff to do was give me an estimate. Didn't have to be, they didn't have to track their hours for 6 weeks or anything like that, but just an estimate of how much time they spent on each of these program areas: social justice, pastoral care, connections, which are like the small groups and things, religious education, and Sunday mornings. And then I multiplied that each staff person's total package, salary, benefits, etc., by that percentage that they gave me, and totaled it all up, and it added up to this pie chart of where does the money go. So this isn't hours, this is pay. I'm the senior minister, I get paid more than the DRE. So in some ways, that's part of the reason Sunday mornings cost more, because I spend more of my time on that. So breaking that down so that people can start to see where the money goes helps people feel a little more ownership of it. Because this idea that like you're just giving to this entity because you love it, which is like great in theory, but people need to feel like they know where they're giving, where their money's going. So we put it down in writing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that narrative budgeting in a minute. But we also started to realize people just didn't know. They didn't know how much it cost to run the congregation. And this historical reticence of even talking about it was, kind of feeding into that. So, many of our UU members in our congregations belong to NPR, and they pledge $10 a month. And that's totally sufficient because there are 1 million people paying $10 a month to NPR. And so we had to remind them, no one else is paying our staff except you. They didn't know that. They were sort of like, well, don't you get money from the UUA? We were like, no, we give money to the UUA. So having to just make that very, very clear was important. So one of the other documents that, one of the other pages from our documents here was this letter that I wrote to the congregation, and I'm pulling it up and I'll share it with you in just a second. But the last page of our stewardship materials was a letter from me. And remember, I was their brand new senior minister, so I decided to kind of put it all out there. I figure, hey, they all still really like me. I'm new, and I might as well, use some of this goodwill if I can. And it's not opening. Come on, open. Anyway, it's not overly important, but that you see it. But what was in that letter were, in the center of the text, which was a letter from me, narrative letter, was bold. It said, we need $100,000 more than last year. And that's $871,000 total, which is $1,350 per adult member. That's what we need. And this is the first time in the history of this congregation that anyone has ever said dollar numbers. And I believe deeply in tying giving to values, tying giving to, why generosity, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But at the end of the day, people thought $100 a year was sufficient. So to hear that that number was $1,350 was a shock. And then we went on and on and on to say, many people can give a lot more than that and do, and many people can't give anywhere near that, and that's totally fine. We worked really hard to say, we recognize that not everybody's going to be able to give that amount, and that's fine. But it averages out. And so if you can give a lot more than that, please do, to help, balance out for the folks who can't. So that was also part of that, taking away the shame and stigma, just saying, let's just give according to our ability, but here's the reality. Here's how much it costs. So that was a big shift for our congregation. And then back to that narrative budgeting, we didn't get as far as I wanted, but this year I'm looking at taking some of those numbers and sort of boiling it down to like, what does a Sunday morning cost in terms of, if it takes me X number of hours to write my sermon and the music director for choir practice and the cost of music and all of those things, how much, if we put on 52 Sundays in a year, 53 if you count Christmas Eve, how much is one Sunday? So we're not going so far as to say like sponsor a Sunday, although I'm not totally beyond that. The other thing is, how much does it cost to educate one of our RE kids? Those kinds of questions. And my husband does fundraising for a living. He's a nonprofit development director. So I pick his brain. And people like feeling like they're giving to something specific, even if they sort of know deep down that they're not. The World Wildlife Fund, adopt a panda. Like, I know I did not just actually adopt a panda, but it kind of makes me feel good, and I get a little stuffed animal panda at the end of the day. So the idea that kind of breaking it down in that way, people can go, oh, that's something tangible. I can pay for that. And that feels good to people. So the other thing we did is we had parties. We're too big for the individual asks, the one-to-one canvas, which is absolutely best practice, but we're way too big for that. So, and way too understaffed. So we had a series of parties. I think we had 12. They were hosted at different people's homes that volunteered to have food and drinks and stuff at their house. And we sent out specific invitations. Some of them were geographic invitations, like, hey, you all live in this town, you could come to this party. Some of them were asks, like we did a party at my home, which was kind of a big deal for folks. And we invited people who were giving at a pretty generous level, but we were pretty sure could give more. So these weren't the folks giving $1 a month, but they were the folks that we felt pretty confident could give more. And they were also folks that were kind of newish, like under 10 years. So we felt like they had a lot more sort of flexibility in their movement. So we specifically invited those people to my house. They all came. They all raised their pledge. That was cool. At those parties, we started with asking everyone to share their favorite memory of the fellowship. So that was cool. Got people kind of warmed up, feeling like, oh, I love this place and I don't want anything to happen to it. And then we started talking about the trivia of how much does it cost and all of those things. We played a game, we gave out candy. And then at the end, we kind of went over the stewardship materials and talked to people. So that was how the parties went, and people seemed to really respond well to them. We're definitely doing those again. We also had a team of stewardship ambassadors who were not on the stewardship team, but are folks that we felt like were comfortable talking about this stuff. And they signed up to go to groups like the choir or the youth group or the women's circle. And they were also ambassadors from within those groups. So it was a choir member or a women's circle member. So they were like, I know this person. It's not some stranger from the stewardship team, this disembodied stewardship team. And they talked to them about stewardship. So that was also useful. So those two things, the parties and the ambassadors, were kind of our way of getting around the fact that we couldn't do a total one-to-one canvas.
Christina, I just have one question. If you
Sure.
Was there overlap then? Some people got invited to parties and they also had an ambassador show up to the choir, so they got it twice. And did anyone complain, or was that fine?
The ambassadors weren't doing like a walkthrough specifically of the materials. And they were doing a little bit more around more of the values based, like, why do you love this place? What would it mean if this place disappeared in your life? And why do you give? And then we gave out the materials. But at the parties, we did more of a like step-by-step walkthrough of the materials. So it was a little bit of an overlap, but not much. And no, I didn't hear any complaints. So then we also did 2 Sunday services instead of 1. And we didn't call either of them Stewardship Sunday, nor did we call them the Sermon on the Amount, which I hear a lot, which, you know,
Christina,
we just didn't tell people.
I'm so sorry, before you move on, I just saw a question in the chat box that I want to get to while we were just at it. Tony asks, how do you deal with the confidentiality of what people give? If you put people in groups by how much they give, aren't you risking confidentiality, like that party at your house?
Yeah. We didn't tell people that's why they were invited. So they didn't know. We told them they were invited because they were generous people. And we, wanted to talk to them about their generosity. But they weren't all within a certain category of giving. Some people gave significantly more and significantly less, but it was about kind of what we thought was their maybe potential. And that was all done internally with our executive team, which was me, the other minister, and our administrator. So no one kind of knew who was in which group of actual number of giving.
And that sounds like from the outside, it would have been a mix of ages, a mix of incomes. And so no one could have guessed how you got the invite and why you didn't.
Nope. We told them it was because we knew them to be generous. And that was clear to them in the invitation. For my party in particular. Everyone else was pretty scattered invitations. And we also opened it up for anybody to come. We had it in the newsletter. We had a sign up genius. You can sign up for any of these parties and come. The other flip side of the coin on that question, though, for me is I sort of challenge the deep need for confidentiality at all. Again, this goes back to my desire for talking about money to not be a secretive, dirty thing. I wouldn't blast it in the newsletter or put it on the website, but I want people to feel pride in any gift that they can give. And that takes training. We have to teach people how to feel differently about money. But I also but by reinforcing the idea that we can't tell anybody anything about anybody's giving patterns, especially the stewardship team who is tasked with this job of actually handling this question, and I'm dealing with that in my own congregation. This question of confidentiality is a big one. And we're slowly kind of chipping away at the why. Why does it have to be a super secret? So that's part of my own sort of philosophy about it. And we'll talk about that more in just one second when I get to the service that we did. So
before I interrupted you, you were we did not do the sermon.
Yeah, we didn't do the sermon on the amount. We didn't do the one service that no one wants to come to. We did two, kind of at the bookends of the stewardship campaign. The first Sunday was an all ages service, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And we gave out the materials. And then for everyone who didn't pick up their materials, they got mailed to them. Hang on one second. I'm going to turn off my baby monitor because I can hear my husband doing bedtime. All right. That was annoying. Maybe you couldn't hear it, but I sure could. Then the second service was 4 weeks later, and it was when we asked people the following week the materials, the pledge forms were due. So that was the stewardship season, and we had testimonials at every service, the two services plus the ones in between, of people sharing why they give and why they love the fellowship. One young woman talked about how she had just left an abusive relationship and was at our local domestic violence shelter, and her caseworker recommended the fellowship, and she came, and how it saved her life. And she said, how much would you pay to save someone's life? And we ended up making that, and she gave us permission to share it, and we put it on a podcast and emailed it to everybody. It was so, so powerful. And now she's a worship leader. That was cool. So we did the testimonials the whole time. And then the last service was a, sort of traditional adult service with really powerful music from our choir. And we talked about, the title was Living in Two Worlds. And we talked about sort of the spiritual world and the ideal world that religious communities live in, the world of our principles and justice. And then the reality of living in the world where we have to pay bills. And how do we balance those two, living in those two worlds? And we were on the Soul Matters themes, and I think the theme of the month was balance. So it worked out really well. And then we also reviewed the results from the first service. So I'll tell you about that in a second. That was what was so fun about it. So we also talked about this, the lie that is our society tells us is scarcity, that there's not enough. There's not enough of anything, that you're not enough, that you don't have enough time, you don't have enough energy, you don't have enough money, unless you get these things. And that's how they sell us stuff. And that lie of scarcity can only be countered with the truth of abundance, that you are enough, and that you have enough, and that you have enough time, and you have enough money, whatever that is, to be a gift to the world, even if it isn't what you want. So that was sort of the theological message at second service. So I see the comment down in here by Therese. It says, I believe generosity breeds more generosity, so super secrecy is discouraged. So yeah, that's part of my, I agree, that's part of my philosophy, that sharing your generosity, even if your generosity is small, whatever that means. There's parables in the Bible about the poor woman who gives a tiny amount, but it's a lot for what she has. And that's good. So one of the first of the two worship services was the big one. And that's what I want to spend time with you talking about tonight, which was really, really fun. So it was about vision. And we used a story. It was an all ages service, multi-generational service. And we used a story, children's story by Daniel Pinkwater called The Orange Splot. And I have a picture here of the orange splot. And let's see if I can share it with you. If I can get my share screen to work. All right. So this is the cover of the book, The Big Orange Splot, and it's about a man who lives on a street, and it is a, quote, neat street where all of the houses look exactly the same. And one day, a bird flies over his house and drops a can of paint on his roof. No one knows why. And all the neighbors beg him to paint his house, to fix it, so that they can go back to being a neat street. And he thinks about it, and he finally decides that, yes, he will paint his house. And he paints it to look like this. And his neighbors are aghast at why he would do such a thing. And he says, my house is me, and I am my house, and it looks like all of my dreams. And so what I had people do in the service was we had our DRE is very artistic, and she did a line drawing of the building of our fellowship. So it was kind of like a coloring page. And everyone got one, and there were crayons and markers throughout the sanctuary. And I had everyone draw the fellowship of their dreams. So if it looks like all of your dreams, what does that mean? And then I had people switch papers with the person next to them and splot or scribble on their neighbor's work. And then process what it feels like to have that disappointment. Like, I had a vision and you messed it up. And then get back your original, and incorporate your neighbor's splot into your vision. And we talked about how coming to church is not about only your vision. It's a collective process, and how what might feel like a splot, like, they didn't go along with my vision, might actually create something a lot more beautiful, just like the orange splot did on this guy's house. we also had a corner in the sanctuary. Our administrator was like, you want a what? I put a tarp down and had smocks and paint and a big canvas. And I encouraged the kids throughout the whole service to come up for a minute or two and build on this canvas. And we have 2 services, so it built over the 2 hours, and to paint something beautiful. And I had this big empty wall in my office, so I hung their painting in my minister's office. So I'll show you what it turned out to look like. So this is the painting on the left, and that's what it looks like in my office on the right. So and having the kids knowing that that was going to go in my office, like for real, was cool for them. I felt like I trusted them. And so that was the kind of the art portion of and the service portion was about vision and the co-creation of our future visions. And then at the very end of the service, everyone had, with their order of service, been given an envelope and told explicitly not to open it until they were told to. And so at the very end, I invited everyone to open their envelopes, and inside was money. This is sometimes called a reverse offering, and I didn't invent reverse offerings, but I've never heard it done the way we did it. So usually in reverse offerings, everybody gets some money. In our case, we gave differing amounts of money. Most people got $1. A lot of people got $5. A number of people got 10. Some got 20. A few people got 50, and 2 people in each service got 100. And they opened it up. And remember, this was an all ages service, so children could also get that amount of money. And I heard one mom say to her kid, "Did you hear Reverend Christina? You're going to have to give that money away." She was like, "Don't get all excited yet. You're not buying $50 worth of candy." But it was, the challenge was then to take that money and use it somehow in the world to pay it forward. So in our case, we get about, give or take, 200 people at each service, so 400 people on a Sunday. So I needed 400 envelopes, and I did a whole bunch of math, and we needed $2,116. And I was like, where are we going to get this money? And we have a guy who's got some money, and he's always saying, like, if you just need me for a project, let me know. So I called him and said, do you have $2,116 we could use for this project? And he said, I do, but let me see if I can get 2 or 3 other people to join me in helping with this. And he had the idea of, bringing the generosity, expanding it. So they did. They came up with the money, and they wanted to be anonymous. And so when everyone opened their envelopes and went, "Oh, there's money inside," I was able to say, this was donated by your peers, by fellow fellowship members who believed that this was a cool idea and they wanted to inspire your generosity. So inside the envelope, in addition to the bill of money, was a little, like a little slip of paper with some instructions, and I'll show you that slide of what the instructions looked like. So it's just this little strip of paper, and it said, pay it forward. And then it had these 3 questions. What did it feel like to get this gift? Did you feel jealous of folks who got more, or guilty because you had more than others? We challenge you to use all of your gifts, big or small, to serve the world. And before March 4th, which was our second stewardship service, we want you to use this gift to serve the world and share with us what you did. And then I created an email address, payitforward@feuf.org, with a description and a picture if you want, or post it to this Facebook group, Fellowship Pay It Forward. Not everybody uses Facebook, so the email was an option for them. And then what I did was I converted their emails and dropped it onto the Facebook page, so that the Facebook would be a kind of a log of of what people did with their money. And it was a closed group, so it wasn't secret. You could find it and add yourself to it, but it wasn't like public. But the results of this were so cool. So the first piece of it was the processing of the feelings. So, you know, when people first opened that envelope, they were like, oh, I got $1. And then they looked over and they were like, hey, wait, you got $10. That's not fair, you know? Or they got like, oh my God, I got $50 and this person only got $1. Eek, right? And both directions, people have this initial reaction of like a negative feeling. And that goes back to my comment about helping people heal. And basically I said, whatever your initial feeling was, whether it was guilt or worry or jealousy, we have those feelings all the time about the resources that we have. And like, guess what? Most of it we didn't earn anyway. You didn't earn this money. You just walked in and we handed it to you. So that's the definition of privileges. We all have privileges to greater or lesser degrees. And so we spent some time in the service kind of talking about that. And then I said, now, whatever your gifts are, whether you got $1 in that envelope or 50, whether you have a lot of money in your bank account or very, very, very little, you have something and you can do something in the world with it. So let's do that. So I want to show you the Facebook page. So let me share this screen with you. If I can get it to open up. Right. So this is our Facebook feed, and we call Fellowship Pay It Forward, and people just drop their stuff. So some people just said, I use my money to give a meal to our warming shelter, or like I didn't know what to do, or I gave it to a coworker, or I paid a friend's medical bills. This person gave it to provide money so that Black girls could go see Wrinkle in Time, which was starring a Black actress. And that was a really interesting fund that I thought was really cool that they wanted to support. So a lot of people, they involved their children in it. They bought supplies for, you know, the local shelter, things like that. I love this one. I admit that the envelope of money yelled at me every day to make a decision. So, you know, and I thought that's an interesting observation of her process. You know, I wonder how that plays out in her own life and her own thinking about money. These kids worked with their mom to buy money for their gift cards for their teachers. This person didn't even go to the service, but said, I will give a donation. So they didn't even get any money. This person will give a donation to the first person who private messages me. And then somebody did, and she donated to that person. So a lot of different other gifts here. And one that I thought was really cool, a lot of people said they added money to it, or they multiplied it by some factor. So let's see, I'm trying to, this guy here, he had read about an article saying that libraries, that library fines prevent people from using the library. And so he contacted our library to see if he could pay off any people's fines with his money. And they said they didn't have a program for that. And so he worked with them for the next few months to create a way for the library, the public library system, to have a system by which people could donate to forgive other people's overdue fines. And now that program exists because this guy was inspired by this project to donate it. And few months ago, he posted on Facebook and said, it's finally live, and, shared the library's website, and that was really cool. These people added to their gift and donated it, and they took pictures of the people who were receiving the gift, which was really fun. The people liked being a part of this project, and they liked hearing, wow, your church gave you money? That's so cool. This couple they got $6 between the two of them. One of them got a 1 and one got a 5, and they ended up giving a multiple of 6 to our fellowship endowment. This person was like, I didn't know what to do, but I ended up giving it back to the fellowship, because how kind of church gives people money? Who does that? Which I think is, so she tripled her gift and gave it back, which is really cool. These people paid off school lunches for kids who can't afford it at our local public schools. This kid made a video and posted it on Facebook and talked about our project, and then asked people to join him in giving, and they did. So that was really cool. And yeah, so anyway, it was just really, really fun. This was cute. She said her son was mad that he was encouraged to give his money away, but then he got excited about the ways that he could share it. So he gave it to his friend for his birthday. This kid posted on the internet about the Great Barrier Reef, and created an educational video about the Great Barrier Reef. So there was just so many beautiful stories on this, and people really loved scrolling through them and reading them. The conversations that were created, and it allowed people to really think about the ways that they can give if they're inspired to do that. So some people gave back to the fellowship, but a lot of people didn't, and I think that's great. I think that's really cool. So at our second service, we spent some time looking at the Facebook feed. We have a screen in our sanctuary, and then we kind of scrolled through it, and I highlighted the ways in which generosity begets generosity. People saying, like, I got $1, but I ended up giving $10 to this thing, or I gave my $10, but I posted it on Facebook and people joined me in giving, and that was really cool. I don't have any hard and fast data if the people who participated in our reverse offering gave a lot more to the stewardship campaign, but at the end of the day, I think it got them thinking, and that's almost more important to me.
Christina, I have a question too.
Sure.
I would think, okay, I cannot be the only person who's like so touched and moved as you go through the Facebook feed. And someone actually asked, your Facebook feed would be public, right? If they wanted to go to your Facebook page, they could scroll through and find these. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could. You can. It's just called Fellowship Pay It Forward. So if you go to Facebook, you can add yourself to the group.
What was the mood like in the month or so after this? I just think this would have been an incredible shift. What shifted in mood and culture and relationship? What happened?
Well, people talked about money, and that was a huge shift away from this idea that we can't talk about money because it's not polite, to what are you going to do with your reverse offering? That became kind of the conversation in coffee hour. And I loved I spend a fair amount of my time on Facebook doing ministry there too. And people posting on their own private Facebook pages saying, OMG guys, I just got $20 from my church and now I don't know what to do with it. Where should I give it? So it became this public thing where people were going, your church gave you money, there was a lot of excitement and joy, but also a little bit of trepidation because people were like, oh no, now I have this responsibility. And I was like, yeah, you do have this responsibility. That's the whole point. And so at the second service, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about the fact that, having that nagging feeling like, oh God, I have this dollar in this envelope and I'm supposed to give it away and I don't know what to do with it. Like, we should kind of feel that way all the time about our general resources. Like, I have a nice house with a spare bedroom. Like, how can I use that? Or, I don't have a lot of money, but I have a few extra hours on Friday afternoon. What can I do with that? How can I give in this world in a way that that also feeds my own spirit? So that was kind of the shift in the mood.
And so was that a permanent shift then? Do you feel like something really kind of moved for good? And we do have a couple questions in the chat box, but I'll ask you that question. And then KP Lyon had a question I'll go to next. But did you feel like the culture shift for good?
I don't know. I don't know if it's permanent. I mean, the conversation isn't still happening because the event is kind of over. But in talking, I did a service 2 weeks ago on ancestors, and I did half the service on, revering our own ancestors who've brought us to this point, even if we don't know who they are. And then also the second half was recognizing that we're not the pinnacle, we're not the end of the genetic line. So we will be someone else's ancestors, even if we don't have our own biological children. That, generations from now, people will look back on our generation and kind of wonder at us and hopefully honor us. And if not, why, and in that conversation, I talked about our endowment and how people had given to our endowment knowing that they would never see the result of that. And that was in a sermon that didn't have anything to do with money, but I talked about the endowment, and people were like, thank you for talking about the endowment. That's really cool. Whereas I think even a year ago, people would have been sort of miffed that I had sort of polluted this ancestor service with conversation about money. So I sense that there is a little bit of shift there, and we're going to keep working on it. My service this season coming up, my big stewardship sermon is called Sex and Money. I'm a big fan of clickbait sermon titles, get people in the door. And I want to talk about the ways in which sex and money are two things that we're sort of told we're not supposed to talk about. They're dirty, they're private. And the Unitarian Universalist tradition has done a really good job of taking sex and sexuality out of the shadows and into something that's healthy and normal and beautiful and part of being human. And what if we could do that with money? Wouldn't that be incredible? So that's the thrust of my sermon this year, which is going to be a similar kind of idea. I saw the question about if someone really needed the money and felt like, oh my gosh, now I'm just to give it away, and I feel bad that I didn't. No one would know if they saved it. And we did talk about the fact that sometimes in congregational life, we give, and then sometimes we receive. And it's kind of like an insurance policy that when you're in need, that's why we exist. We exist to help when we're in need. And so for those of us, when we're in times in our life when we aren't in need and we have resources to give, we should do that, because there might be another time 6 months from now or a year from now that we do need. And maybe it's material need, or maybe it's emotional need or spiritual need, but that both of those things are always happening in our congregation. And I try to make that very clear that I didn't say if you need to keep the money, go for it, but that sometimes that's what we need, and that's okay too. Our stewardship drive does not last all year. I see that question there. My last congregation in Annapolis did a year-round canvas, and in some ways it was really cool, and in some ways it was a nightmare. The tracking of pledging was hard, but the actual talking about money year round was actually kind of cool. It took the pressure down. So we don't do a year round canvas here in Appleton yet. We might at some point. But I saw the question about, I had a battery fail and lost when you passed out the money. So the money was passed out, and then 4 weeks later, we asked people to tell us what they did with it. So how are we on time?
Okay, I've been riveted, and I can't believe it, but it looks like we only have like 20 minutes.
Can I do 5 minutes on the raffle?
I wish you would. And by the way, I invited Christina because I loved the story about the money in the envelope. So when I heard she did that, I'm like, oh, we got to do a webinar and share that. So thanks so much, Christina. And now you're going to like this one. This is a good one too.
Yeah. So just so you don't think I'm a miracle worker, because I'm not. We had asked for $100,000 over the previous year's budget, and we didn't reach that. There was no way, and we went into it sort of knowing there was no way that was going to happen. But we got about $50,000, which is a ton of money for a congregation that's not used to giving a lot over what they are used to giving. So I considered that a real win. And we ended up trimming the budget back a little bit, not particularly in our staff area, which was good. We were able to increase staff. But we needed to come up with $30,000 in order to get to the budget that we wanted. And I was talking to Vale Weller at the UUA, just generally about stewardship. And she kind of offhandedly mentioned this congregation in Massachusetts that does this really cool raffle. And then she moved on in the conversation. And I was like, wait, back up. And I decided we should try this. So the raffle is, the prize is dinner for 2 anywhere in the world. And we guessed that prize, I did some research, and it looks like that prize is going to max out at no more than $10,000. And we can set a maximum value on the prize. So we could say 8,000 if we wanted to. But so in order to get $30,000, we needed to net 40 or gross 40, and then we would, with the prize, we would net 30. I went to the stewardship team and the board and said, what do you think of this? You know, the congregation, will people balk at this, or they think it's cool? Everybody, even our very fiscally conservative treasurer, loved it, was like, absolutely, this is really fun. It's really energetic. It's not asking people to dig into their own wallets again. People who don't have any money themselves could still sell 5 or 10 tickets. And people will get excited about the idea of like, wow, the dream of where would I go? That's such a cool, you're kind of, when you buy a raffle ticket, you're buying the dream. We're going to sell the tickets in winter when everyone wants to get the heck out of Wisconsin. So that gets the dream factor up a little bit too. At first I was like, we could have 400 people sell 20 tickets a piece and we could make $80,000. And we came up with the idea that we could probably very reasonably get, let's see, where's my math here? 200 people to sell 10 tickets a piece at $20 a ticket. And that's $40,000. And then a $10,000 prize is 30,000 net. So again, we have about 700 members, about 500 really consistent members. If 200 of them sold 10 tickets, I just don't think that's impossible. So it hasn't happened yet. Maybe I'm being really naive. My church business administrator is not thrilled with this plan. But because the treasurer was on board, she was like, oh shoot, now I have to be on board with it. That was a funny board meeting. The administrator looked at the treasurer and went like, you too, really? She's just not a gambler. But I think it's exciting. The people at the annual meeting the congregation approves our budget, and this was in our budget. People were like, what's this $30,000 line? And we talked about it, we told them about it. We had already had a pre-meeting about it, and people were excited, and they overwhelmingly approved the budget. It was unanimous. So so I'll let you know later how it goes. And if any of you are in the state of Wisconsin, you can buy a ticket.
Okay, we all want to know, when is this raffle happening? Because we're going to want to check your website to find out what happened.
December and January, we're selling the tickets, and it will happen in February, the drawing.
And I had a question. Are the slides from tonight going to be available? Will you send those to me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. And we had a question from Veronica. Can you speak more about money and healing? Do you have any references to that? It's clearly caught some attention. It's a good one, Christina.
No, I don't have any specific references off the top of my head. I'm sure I could find some. This is just kind of out of my own anecdotal pastoral evidence. My prior career was in clinical psychology, and I know I learned stuff about the impact of the disagreements about money in marriage, and in that like when we do premarital counseling, it's not that having enough or not having enough is the problem. It's that you have a disagreement about, is it okay to carry credit card debt or not? Things like that. That's what leads to marital strife around money. So, and then usually stress around money is a common factor in death by suicide. So I don't have any particular books or anything you could read. This is just my own kind of sense that people have hangups about money the same way they have hangups about sex. And I want people to have wholeness. And as long as we live in a capitalist society, which I would love for us not to be living in, as long as we live in that society, we need to learn how to cope with the fact that money is not tied to our intrinsic worth, and get past that.
Did you have more, Christina, that you have not yet shared?
I like the question about the raffle rules. Selling tickets in Michigan, there are rules. There are state-by-state laws about how you sell. You can't mail the tickets across state lines, apparently. So maybe we could find like a proxy system or something and not tell anyone. I don't know. But now this is going to be online, and I just said that. Yeah, we had to get a raffle license. There are state rules. The raffle license isn't very expensive, at least in Wisconsin. It's like $25. And we have somebody who's done this kind of thing for a nonprofit before, and she's helping us with all those logistics. The cool thing is, like, children are legally allowed to sell tickets. So like they could sell them at school or to their Girl Scout troop or, things like that. We haven't had our first raffle team meeting yet. That's happening in a week or two. So we're going to start hammering out all those details soon. Any other questions?
So there's a couple more on there. A question from Julie. Do you do a brochure or stick to the web, or do both? For, I think, your Canvas sheet.
For the Canvas for the stewardship team. We did a lot of paper. We did the mailer. It was, I think, 3 pages, double-sided, folded in half like a book. And one of the pages, the outside cover, when you open it, was the actual pledge form. So we also have a web pledge form. It's a little hard for me. I'm 36, I think. I don't know how old I am. I think I'm 36. So I'm quite young, and I'm kind of a digital native. So dealing with the web is much easier for me. Having an app on my smartphone or something is easier for me. But I moved to Paper Valley. Appleton is the home of the paper industry. And people still have on their email signature lines, like, please think twice before you print this email. And I'm like, who prints emails? but that's the culture in my congregation, is a lot of paper. So yeah, we had a brochure, we had the packet of materials, the paper form, the piece of paper in the envelope that they received. But we also try to have the online version too.
And someone else asks about the raffle. Does it include travel expenses to the destination and any lodging?
Yes. So the $10,000 prize or thereabouts, we're basically going to hook the winner up with a travel agent and give them a max prize value. We're going to pay round trip coach airfare on a major airline to the destination, 3 nights lodging, and a fancy dinner, like up to a certain amount of money, like $500 or something. And if they want to add nights, so they want to actually make this a 10-day trip instead of a 3-day trip, they could add 7 nights hotel on their own cost if they want. So that's what it's dinner for 2, but it's the whole trip.
And someone here just writes, Katie writes, a book called Love, Let Go by Laura Sumner Trow and Amalia Campbell chronicles a church in Chicago that gave $500 to each member after a windfall. Very interesting read. Wow.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah. And then Randall asks, any idea of holding the reverse giving again? Would you do it again?
Yeah, I think I would. I'm not going to do it this season. I don't want it to get played out. I don't want people like, oh, we do that every year. I want it to still have novelty and be interesting. The novelty allows people to really think about it. The fact of receiving $1 from your congregation is not in and of itself that valuable. But the surprise of, oh my gosh, I was not expecting this, and that's really cool. And now I have to think about my relationship to money a little bit was kind of the point.
So Tony asks, having used the raffle to fill the budget this year, Tony must have like an accounting finance background.
Yeah, what are we going to do next year?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah, we're going to keep working our way up. So last year was this huge push to go, to get $100,000, and with the raffle we got 80. So next year we're going to ask people to go up a little bit more, and maybe not quite as much. But we're not increasing the budget next year. We're going to try to keep a flat budget, except for like maybe $3,000 or $4,000 for we're hoping to get an intern, and then the general cost of living. So that goes up like, I don't know, like $20,000 or something. So we're hoping to go up by like 40. So the 20,000 is just to sort of keep a flat budget, and then another 20 to kind of help make up for some of the raffle. So we might do another fundraiser again, but we're not going to expect that it brings in quite as much money. So we're going to just kind of inch our way up. Last year's theme was Justice Starts Here. And it was this very like, all right, guys, pull it together. We have to make $100,000. This year, the theme is going to be a different tone. We're kind of using the metaphor of the tortoise and the hare, and we're doing kind of the slow and steady wins the race. Kind of like just keep on going, friends. Like that's what it means to give and to be committed to a faith community. So it's not going to be as like, it's going to be more like, we're doing good. Let's keep going.
And Christina, I've just noticed something interesting. When do you do your canvas? Is it in the spring or late winter?
We do it in the spring. Yeah.
You already know the theme for it, and it is.
Oh, November. I have every Sunday sermon planned.
But there's a lot of stewardship committees that aren't even yet thinking about that. And so what I'm also learning from you is that in the fall, you're engaging your lay members already, and they are talking to you about planning for this. And I think that's a wonderful pattern.
We meet monthly year round.
Really? Your stewardship team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was...
you heard that here first, people. The stewardship team meets monthly year round.
Yeah, otherwise you get out of the habit, and then it becomes this thing that's kind of this big hair on fire push. And instead it's easier to just sort of have a perpetual calendar. Like, okay, we think about this in September, and we do this in October, and then we do this, and then we put together the materials, and then we, and it's not it doesn't have to be a hair on fire kind of thing. One of the things that was interesting about the fellowship was that the org chart, our organizational chart of our staff responsibilities, had the business administrator responsible for stewardship. She's never there on Sundays. She is a accountant by trade, and she can do the mailing and the tracking of pledges and stuff. But when I came in, I was like, I think stewardship should be in my job description. And everyone was kind of like, oh, really? And I just felt really committed to the idea that if culture is going to change, it has to come from the pulpit. Not only from the pulpit, certainly, but also from the pulpit. And so what we did was we actually divided it, and we call it stewardship administration is in her portfolio, and stewardship leadership is in my portfolio.
Wonderful.
So I'm at every stewardship meeting.
I have a question from Mr. Finney. How effective was your party presentations? Do you mean all of them? I can see you, Dennis. Do you mean all of the party presentations? Like, how did that go? Was that, yeah, did that raise enough money for you? Was that conveying the information?
One thing that we don't have a ton of that I want a lot more of, and I would encourage any stewardship team to do this, is get data. So we know what we got from these people, but we don't have historical data on how much or little they raised over last year. And everything gets kind of aggregated once people make their pledges. And it would be not impossible to do a one-to-one comparison. Like, did going to the party actually help them increase their pledge over the folks who didn't go to the parties? So that's one of the things we're hoping to start collecting this year, is some sort of baseline data, so that over time we can kind of track these initiatives and see if they're actually doing anything. One thing I do know is that the people who attended the parties, we didn't have to track them down for their pledge. And any stewardship team knows that that's the worst part, is when you have to hound people for their pledge.
That's a gift.
Yeah.
So I think we're just going to have time for one more question I see here. Is the size of the congregation increasing along with the budget?
Not right this second. We just went through a 2-year pretty major transition period, 3-year if you count my coming. So the size of the congregation is, kind of give or take about the same, which during a transition period is actually considered good. But we'll give it make 3 more years to see if the growth is coming. But we're just trying to get the staffing level and the budget to where our current size is. So according to, we're not trying to grow our budget beyond our size. We're trying to grow our budget to our size. So according to any kind of congregational experts on stewardship, our budget was staffed for decline in size. If we continued at the rate we were going with the staff size we had, we were going to lose members over time. And so that was not anything I ever said from the pulpit, but we did say it in the parties, where we talked about, like, this is just sort of the reality. And people who were sharing those beautiful memories of the fellowship and how warmly welcomed they were and all those things, they were like, oh no, we don't want that. We want everybody who walks through these doors to feel, to have this place. So that's part of we're trying to get the people in the congregation to give enough to keep us at baseline.
So, and I'll just do one more question I saw from Therese Presley. Could you just take the $10,000 cash instead of the trip?
I have no idea. I have to talk to someone who knows legal stuff about things like this first.
All right, we're going to have to leave it on that note. Christina, you've been amazing. Yay, the silent Zoom round of applause for Christina. I love your ideas, your energy. This congregation is also Fair Share, an honor congregation, which has been a stretch for them. So they're really trying to live into these values. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Christina, beautiful, beautiful. Kisses to you and Fox Valley. And we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.